Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, the president says recession is not inevitable, and the Federal Reserve raises interest rates an additional 75 basis points, or 0.75%, which is the largest increase in 28 years. We have that and more tonight on this Friday, June the 17th, 2022. Hi, I'm Andre Laborde. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up on this Friday, June the 17th, 2022. I hope your week went well. Well, it seems like gasoline is rising on a daily level. Today, the price of a regular gallon of gas nationwide is now at $5 a gallon. From 1 year ago, when that same gallon of gas cost $3.07 per gallon. That's a 62.8% increase in 12 months. J.P. Morgan predicts that gasoline will be hitting $6 a gallon nationwide by the end of the summer. Now, when they made that call last month in May, and gasoline was at $4.53 a gallon, that was a prediction hard to fathom. But now, at $5 a gallon and going up daily, it seems that prediction will not only come true, but maybe here sooner than expected. The Biden administration has not hidden the fact that they would like to do away with the fossil fuel business that produces oil and gas and move people more into electric vehicles, EVs. But not everyone has an average price of an electric vehicle at over $50,000. Now, Tesla today is the only EV car maker that is profitable in their EV market. Others, Ford, Hyundai, Volkswagen, and others, have such a smaller share, and it'll take some time before they build their electric vehicle markets. That's why Tesla, generally speaking, is the only game in town when it comes to EVs. Of course, with more people buying electric vehicles, the prices for the components to make those batteries are also soaring. Lithium has soared over 700% since January of last year, and cobalt has gone up over 150%, as well as nickel almost 100% during the same time period. Now, we talk about China and being dependent on China, but presently, that country, China, supplies 90% of the Earth's minerals, and lithium, one of the many minerals used in making the batteries to propel an EV, comes from other countries. The top 5 countries that produce lithium is number 1, Australia, to China being at number 3, Zimbabwe at number 5, and the United States nowhere to be found. Now, if you're not part of that 4.5% of the American public that own electric vehicles, then you're pumping gas and paying prices that are rising daily. When most people hear about the price of a barrel of oil, gasoline immediately comes to mind, and rightfully so, because that is what many people think of when they hear about oil. But out of every barrel of oil produced, close to 20% of everyday products are used with the component of oil. Everything from dishes and food packing, building materials use the oil in the production of their product. If you have spandex and nylon or polyester clothing hanging in your closet, that was used with oil products. And toiletries such as soap, shaving cream, and deodorant, even perfume and colognes use oil for the making of their products. So, when you hear someone say they want to do away with the fossil fuel industry, it's not just gasoline you pump, but everything from soap to mascara you use before leaving the house is affected. Now, coming up tonight, we've got the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, Tim Stewart. Transportation costs are rising because diesel fuel is rising, adding to the transportation cost of every product that has to be delivered across the United States. Well, Tim Stewart, president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, is going to be coming up. But first off, how did the markets do this week? Well, this week, the Dow Jones, S&P, and NASDAQ were all lower for the 3rd straight week. The S&P 500 closed negative for the 10th of the last 11 weeks. And this week, the Dow Jones ended at 29,885. That was down 4.8% for the week. And the S&P 500, they closed at 3,674, which was down 5.8% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they ended at 10,798, which was down 4.8% for the week. Well, let's get to our guest this evening. Tim Stewart, as I said, is the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. And best of all, he's here with us tonight. Hi, Tim. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Recently, a couple of weeks ago, President Biden was in Tokyo, and he said something that was very interesting. He said, when this is all over, basically the fossil fuels will be either minimized or done away with, and then renewables, reusables, such as solar and wind, will be more the predominant. As if to say, never let it get, this is my words now, never let a good crisis go to waste. Do you think it was deliberate?
You know, that's a great question. And honestly, those of us among industry have been trying to determine what the administration's long-term objective is. You know, the first few months when they made a number of decisions that were quite baffling to a lot of us, you know, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, for example, on the very first day, and then suspending the federal onshore and offshore lease programs, and literally that's almost every week where they would conduct a particular action. You know, for the first 6 months of the administration, we thought to ourselves, well, they're adjusting, they're getting their feet, and when the adults get into the administration and get them those appointed positions, then maybe we'll see a change. And honestly, we haven't seen much of a change. In fact, we've seen essentially that same process keep going week after week. I sometimes think there are those among us in industry who can't help but think this is a deliberative action. And I think the president last week, when he said we're undergoing an incredible transition, it was made apparent, he said the quiet part out loud, that this is really part of the deliberative policy process to, whether we like it or not, move our economy off of a fossil fuel-based economy towards something that is still, honestly, yet to be defined, and that's problematic.
J.P. Morgan recently came out with a report that said by August that the way things are going, gasoline should be about $6 a gallon nationwide. Do you think that that report would be an accurate one?
And unfortunately, we see all the market signs that are probably pointing that way. And that's concerning for all of us. From industry's perspective, the last thing we want to see is the demand collapse of the product that we provide. There's another challenge here, though, Andre, that where we talk a lot about gasoline prices, but the thing that we miss out on is the discussion about the impact on manufacturing and agriculture, because only a half a barrel of oil is really used for transportation. The other half is used for the manufacturing. And that's as much a concern for everybody right now as it is just the price of gasoline. So while we're doing the best we can to get as much product into the system, we look at those analysts and we can't disagree with them on those price points by the end of the summer.
From what I understand is that refineries are retooling their refinery from diesel fuel to regular gasoline. Well, because most commercial trucking is done with diesel fuel, that means diesel fuel will be higher. That also means the cost of transportation of products will be going higher, and that also will increase inflation as well too. According to your association, do you see that refineries are retooling their refineries to do more, put out more regular gasoline and less on diesel?
It is such an interesting thing because we've never been in this market situation before where there's been such stress on all of the different consumer fuels and products. And I think the other thing that we're seeing right now is the challenge of sort of regional refinery discrepancies, particularly on the East Coast, where we just have not been able to have the capacity. The U.S. Oil and Gas Association largely represents the upstream component of the industry, and most of our members are independent producers. We're like the farmers who put, wheat or corn into the system. We're putting oil and gas in the system, and it works its way downstream. But we are obviously concerned about the impact on the consumers. What we see also is on the downstream as well as the upstream, this is a challenge we've had with the long-term slow investment process which we've had with regards to reinvesting in the infrastructure that we have. We're down 6 refineries from where we were 2 years ago at this time. And when the operators have gone to the capital markets to get the $1 billion reinvestment, they've been told, we have concerns because we don't know, given where the administration is going, if that market will still be there in 10 or 15 years for us to recoup our investment. California is a great example. California last week announced that they were going to be they're trying to do about 90% of the fossil fuel market by 2040 or 2050. How do we reinvest in refineries in California if the capital markets look at what the state is going to essentially trying to regulate the industry out of existence?
Even if you could find the capital expense to be able to create a new refinery, the regulatory problem would be almost insurmountable.
Without a doubt, the most challenging political and regulatory environment I've ever worked in the industry in the 30 years that I've done this. We've just never seen this confluence of events where it's not just the impacts of the pandemic and the demand collapse that took place 2 years ago, combined with the regulatory push from administration, which has frankly been openly hostile to our industry in a lot of areas. It's been a real challenge. And the operators are feeling those capital squeeze. The refiners are feeling it. The pipeline operators, we're all feeling the squeeze of the real illiquidity of the markets.
When we think about oil companies, the average person will think of the big boys. Well, I used to call them the Seven Sisters. You're thinking of Exxon, You're thinking of Shell, you're thinking of Chevron. But it's like what you're saying with your association. There are so many independent oil and gas E&P explorers. Well, we're in the summer right now, and if I'm understanding correctly, in autumn, E&P producers think of their capital budgets for the next year. Do you see from the people of your association that they're going to be doing the same amount of exploring? Do you think that they're going to be doing less? Because of what we're talking about the climate that's in Washington, D.C. right now.
Great question. And it's been really interesting to watch the members of my association because some are publicly traded companies, a lot are the privately held companies. The publicly traded companies, particularly the shale producers, are facing some real constraints with regards to some of the ESG requirements that Wall Street is asking them to meet. Some of the challenges that they face with regards to the incredible amounts of debt that they had to go into to unlock the shale revolution. So they're being more constrained, I think, in their capital expenditure budgets. What I'm seeing among my members on the other side of that is that the privately held companies, the wildcatters, the guys who have much more flexibility, they're the ones who are racing to take advantage of the price environment right now. And we see a lot more rigs that are up in the air right now than we did certainly a year ago. We're actually above the rig count, I think, this week will be probably above where we were May of 2020. And so each of those companies are making different decisions. But I see the publicly traded companies who are probably being more measured in their capital expenditure budgets than probably the privately held ours.
Whether you're a wildcatter or whether you're talking about, let's say, a publicly traded company, you've got a lot of lending institutions today, and I'm thinking about companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, college endowment funds, that if you mention the term fossil fuels, all of a sudden it's like a vampire is to the cross. They want nothing to do. So all of a sudden, capital drains out. And I would assume also is that banks are also feeling the concern because they too are owned by these same kind of lending institutions. Are your associate members, are you hearing anything about they're having problems of raising money?
This has been a fascinating thing to watch over the last 18 months. I tell you, it's been really interesting because as the Biden administration came in, they essentially said to Wall Street and messaged to the industry that we're going to sunset you. And when you really signal that we're going to sunset you through regulatory actions and just slow walking a leasing process on federal onshore or offshore leases, that sends a very clear message to Wall Street. It's been interesting to watch the oil and gas industry be one of the profitable sectors in this downturn. But from a small company perspective, it has really had its impact. It's when the elephants fight and the grass gets trampled, so to speak. What I've seen is my small members who have had long-term relationships with banks and with other lenders and investors who have really struggled to raise the capital they've needed to take advantage of the market conditions that they are. That is still out there. I was talking to a couple of fund managers who are operating out of Denver, for example, two women who are very, very impressive, and they're in their third raise. And what they said was, while they normally would have approached 40 or 50 different investors to raise their capital, they had to go to 300. So it is having its impact. And again, the problem is when you threaten to sunset an entire industry without a backup plan, it has some real long-term and short-term challenges.
Back in 2019, we were producing the United States domestically about 13 million barrels a day. And now we're producing about 10 and a half, 11 million barrels a day. And we're now trying to make deals with Venezuela and Iran, of all people, to Venezuela and Iran to increase our production capacity. Given to what you're just talking about before with trying to find capital expenses to be able to find new drilling, what are your members telling you when they see well, we're going to go to Venezuela or Iran?
Obviously, they're incredibly frustrated, as well we all are. And I think our industry line has been saying, why is it the Venezuelan crude is good, but Louisiana offshore crude is bad, for example? Why is it that Iranian crude is good and Texas crude is bad? It goes back to my earlier comment where the administration has been really sending such mixed signals to Wall Street and the industry. It's frustrating to us. I do say this, though, look, I don't mean to constantly be pessimistic. I tell people that it is a fool's errand to bet against this industry. And we're seeing our production numbers come up. You mentioned that shortfall between 13 and 11 million barrels. We're seeing that production come up even more, and I think we'll probably be matched where we need to be by the end of the year. I'm that encouraged with regards to how the industry has responded despite the regulatory and the economic obstacles have been put in our place. But the reality is American oil and gas is the cleanest produced of all the world. It's far cleaner. American gas is far cleaner than Russian gas. American crude is far cleaner than Russian crude is, for example. The entire world comes to us for expertise, not just on how to find the oil and gas, but how to do it in an environmentally responsible way.
The Biden administration of wanting to go away from fossil fuels, well, by using tankers, which is what has to be used to bring oil and gas in, or LNG, oil in from Venezuela, Iran, or other locations. Well, tankers need 2,000 gallons an hour just to produce 1 hours of a tanker's ability to travel. Plus, I'll use the term the carbon footprint as well, too. It's sort of like it sometimes boggles the mind.
It's one of those challenges of the fact that the crude market is a global market, and the reality is based on how our infrastructure is built out in the United States, it sometimes makes more sense to bring a tanker in from overseas than it is to try and move it from the Gulf through the canal back over to California, for example. There's some real challenges there, but the reality is we have proven in the past that we were not just North American energy independent, we were North American energy dominant. There isn't any reason why we can't get back to that point. And so tanker traffic and the cost of moving crude globally back and forth becomes really an afterthought or a rounding error when we have as much, when we can get back to our production levels and our refining levels.
Happy to have Tim Stewart. Tim is the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. Don't go away. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We're talking with Tim Stewart. Tim is the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. There was a recent report about a week ago that now the European Union is going to be doing away with about 90% of Russian oil. And there'll still be some countries that are still going to be using it, but for the most part, 90%. But I question that, and maybe you can help me here, is that to me, oil is fungible. You can take a tanker, let's say from Russia, and bring it to another country and put another flag under it. Do you think that that's going to be having any effect of saying no Russian oil?
Obviously, we're all very concerned with the reason for those sanctions. And you're exactly right. Oil is fungible. What we've learned through other countries that have been sanctioned is they can become very creative out of necessity to be able to move their product, whether legally or not. I imagine we're going to see some pretty interesting effects from the sanctions as we look forward 6 months from now. I think the Europeans are doing their best, but they have to realize also that it has to be measured. And so I noticed today that one of the steps they were taking, for example, was to not ensure any tanker that was carrying Russian crude could dock in European ports, for example. So they're doing what they can to send a clear message to the Russians, but the Russians obviously are doing everything they can to work around those sanctions. It's been interesting to watch this unfold because I think what you're seeing is there's for decades now, the almighty petrodollar, as I call it, has been the global benchmark, and it will be interesting to see how the Russians and the Indians and the Chinese and the Iranians, for example, really perhaps put in a counter system to how petrodollars are operated. Obviously, we all want the events in Ukraine to get settled out quickly and we can return back to normal, and hopefully they do so in a way which is agreeable to the Ukrainian people. But I think what we're seeing is probably the beginning of a reorganization of how energy is distributed and paid for across the globe.
My first thought was, well, India is probably going to be there stepping up to saying, I'll buy. China will probably be doing it. And there'll be some other small countries that are going to be going, I'll take the oil in spite of the embargo that the other European Union countries are doing it. So I wonder, that's my only wonder, is that will there be an effect that we're thinking that they are hoping to be?
I would hope so, that those sanctions would be able to send a clear message. And look, we applaud the president going over to Poland a month ago and saying that we will, from the American perspective, we will make sure that North American energy makes its way to our European allies. We support him in that. There's the LNG opportunities in the United States are incredible on a global scale. We have such capacity to be able to be world leaders in the LNG markets. We still have those infrastructure capability challenges that we have. And frankly, the administration, we support what they're doing. We wish they would have talked to us first because there's some real infrastructure challenges. But I was telling somebody earlier today, Andre, as you think of our takeaway capacity, the Sabine Pass and the Golden Pass LNG facilities there in Texas and Louisiana, right across the river from each other, have as much takeaway capacity as the Nord Stream 2 pipeline does, which means the U.S., just those two facilities, we can have a global impact. I would hope that we could be able to get something worked out with our European partners where we can make up the shortfalls that they have imposed upon themselves for good reason on restricting their use of Russian energy.
Because I was watching Dan Yergin just recently, and there was a Houston oil and gas conference, and he was recently, and Dan Yergin was saying that he was surprised on how many European Union representatives were there at the conference inquiring about LNG terminals and of being able, because they're now wanting to get away from Russian dependence of oil and natural gas. Does the United States right now have the ability to create enough natural gas to not only furnish of what the U.S. needs, but also to export it?
I believe we do. I think we are awash in gas, and it's one of those great blessings of being, in the North American geological structures that we are. We have plenty of gas. Frankly, we have plenty of gas to supply our needs and supply the European needs as well. What we need, honestly, is investment in the infrastructure. And this goes to my earlier point, which is you're sending mixed messages to Wall Street where we're going to sunset an industry, but in the meantime, we need to invest billions of dollars to move LNG to Europe and to build those facilities so we can meet our European commitments. Those mixed messages are just really hard for the industry to figure out where it is that this administration is going to go.
Tim, the average person who's watching right now has never known what it's like to have your insides turned upside down while you're spudding a well, or understand that feeling of, you've got so much on the line. And they hear, you talk about mixed messages. The administration is saying that there are about 7,000 oil and gas leases in the United States that oil and gas producers are not using, they're not tapping, that before they before the federal government offers any more leases, they need to use those. What's the true story?
Well, the true story is it depends on how you look at the numbers. And the reality is that if you're an operator on federal lands, particularly onshore, it is an incredibly high regulatory risk that you have when you're trying to put a plan of development together. And it's a very fine balancing act between having your rig, and you site your rig, and it may cost you $50,000 a day just to site the rig. You don't want your rig to get ahead of your permits. You don't want to be able to be 5 or 6 or 7 days into the drilling operation, all of a sudden be shut down. And so the real story is that it's actually a wise business decision for companies to, for want of a better word, bank permits to be able to get their permits and their leases built up, and so you can stay ahead of where your drill plan is. But the reality is this administration a year ago in April was permitting over 600 permits per month, and then by January of this year they dropped to under 100. And so you can't blame industry for not using permits or not developing leases and using permits if the regulatory agency isn't actually approving the permits that we need. And so it's a mixed message. The administration was not being straightforward in the early days of April and May when they're blaming industry for having 9,000 permits that they weren't using. The other challenge, frankly, is the leasing program itself and the offshore. The announcement they made 2 weeks ago that they're going to suspend the lease sales in the offshore in the Gulf. You know, that's taking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres, millions of acres offline in perpetuity until you eventually bring it back around. Imagine if the same thing were done to cropland. If they were to say, we're going to pull 2 or 3 million acres of cropland out of production, it's the same principle, which is you pay the price down the road. Offshore is such a huge investment, and you have that regulatory risk, and the onshore federal operators are running an equal risk as well.
I hope you come back. I really enjoyed it. Tim Stewart, president of U.S. Oil and Gas Association. Thanks, Tim. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we would love to hear from you. Make it pithy, make it concise, and write us at Andre@WallStreetWrapUp.info. And now for a look ahead from market information for next week. But first, what famous break-in occurred on this day 50 years ago that changed history? We've got that answer in just a moment. What famous break-in occurred on this day 50 years ago that changed history? The Watergate break-in. 5 men were arrested breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. in 1972, which helped bring down the presidency of Richard Nixon on this day. Well, coming up next week, we're going to be talking about the retail sector of the economy, from your local shopping malls to online Amazon. Brian Nagel. Brian is the senior analyst for retail at Oppenheimer, covering stores as Walmart, Amazon, AutoZone, and many others. How will a recession affect your retail sector of the economy? That's next week. Brian Nagel. And as a point of reference, the stock market will be closed for Juneteenth, a federal holiday, next Monday on June 20th. Well, as a reminder, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but the best way, set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for this Friday, June the 17th, 2022. I hope you enjoyed it. My thanks so much to Tim Stewart for joining us this evening. But as always, it's you. We appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, you can always follow us on all the social media, on Facebook, now known as Meta platforms, YouTube, Twitter, WYES.org, and others. So enjoy your weekend ahead. Have a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap-Up, I'm Andre Laborde. Remember, money never slips.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.